Hi, my name is Frances Pollock.
I'm Allison Chu.
And you are listening to another episode of Miss Opera Music Mister, a podcast exploration of trends and biases in contemporary opera and how they reflect the world at large.
This podcast was developed out of a research project about gender bias in contemporary opera reviews, and we realized that the issues were much more interconnected and sprawling than we could explore in just one academic research paper. So, we turned to our friends, colleagues, mentors, and role models to help us out. Hey there! Welcome to this episode of Miss Opera Music Mister. This week, we discuss some background research on the field of classical music criticism with MOC founder, colleague, and friend Shola Fadiran. Our conversation was so robust and exciting that we ended up with over an hour's worth of material, and we wanted to share it all with you. Therefore, we decided to divide this episode into two parts. Make sure you tune in next time for part 2. And now, here's Shola to introduce himself.
Hi, I'm Shola Fadiran, and I am an actor and a singer, and now recently with MOC, a writer and director, filmmaker, and collaborator, I guess. And I have my background in opera. I got my degree, my bachelor's in voice from CCM, and I'm doing my master's in acting at Yale School of Drama.
So today I want to talk about critics, and I want to pull back the curtain a little bit and think about critics as or criticism as a profession. And I have a lot of research. I have things that, I found a survey for critics, and it talks about a lot of the demographics, and the results of that survey are really interesting. So I want to share that with you today. And then I also have critics talking about their own profession as well. So talking about what they see their profession to be, what do they think they're doing while they're critiquing, and how does that process happen? And I think that this is sort of going to work as a presentation and a reaction video. How does that sound?
Awesome.
Sounds great.
I'm so excited. Yeah.
I don't think anything is really surprising in this. In what I found. I wasn't really surprised. I kind of was a little bit dismayed maybe by some of the results that I found. But I truly think that criticism is such a hard field. I really think that critics have I really think that critics have the hardest job because, they see a show one time and then they have to go and write about it and write a piece that, tells an audience that they liked it or they didn't like it and why, and articulating why. That's really hard.
Yeah. Totally. Yeah. I think that criticism is, it's just a tricky field. You're sort of playing a big part in dictating taste in a lot of ways, and that's a tenuous, scary position. I would not want it.
Yeah.
I guess is what I'm saying,
Yeah. I mean, there is a lot of weight to what you say, depending on the level of publication you're criticizing for. But Allison, you said something during our MOC retreat, our MOC conference that we had over this last weekend or a weekend ago, about how people follow critique to develop a history of music. Mm-hmm. They follow what people say, what critics say about certain composers to develop an understanding of style, of taste, understanding of how music is growing, where it's coming from. And it's interesting if there's, that is a big responsibility because it's so much power, I think, for critics. So I have a lot of respect for critics as well. I think sometimes when you're a performer, you can also have a little bit of what is the word, aversion to critics, but I think that they're necessary because there is something useful about being part of the culture or being part of the group of people that decides kind of what is good and what is and what's bad. It's useful to have a group of people that does do that. Yeah. So that's not complete artistic anarchy, I guess. Maybe we need that.
Have you ever found yourself in that role? I mean, maybe formally or informally?
Critiquing?
Yeah. Or, being part of a dialogue that feels like it could sort of fall into that purview.
I mean, I think amongst performers.
Oh, that's so true.
Yeah, like in conversation, but I don't think, not in the way I'm thinking of critique. I mean, I think of critiquing things for sure. I think everybody's a part of critiquing things. I think things like Rotten Tomatoes and like, what is it, IMDb, or that does the isn't IMDb, is it? That does the like Metacritic.
Yeah.
That does like the all that does the like amalgamation of all of these different sort of like audience responses, critical reviews to get like a score. I mean, that can be harmful a lot of ways, but there is a part of that that acknowledges that every audience member can be a critic of their work, of the work that they're looking at. And so it's sort of like, I guess, democratized in that way. In that sense, I think I am a critic like everybody, but I don't think I've ever been a critic in the capacity of like the professional, you know.
Yeah.
I feel like for historians, you know, they have a responsibility to make sure that they are representing history in like accurately according to, you know, a public opinion or to a certain group of people. And then, you know, you have like critics, I feel like, are very contemporary, and then historians are taking that and they kind of have to filter that into and build narratives around in history, right? So like the critique actually becomes really important.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, and I think that throughout history you've also seen, you know, places where the critic has, you know, predicted something successfully, and then vice versa, right? Like you also see pieces that have sort of transcended lukewarm criticism. You know, I think about in Finishing the Hat, the Sondheim like biography, he talks about, you know, only recently sort of being the darling of the theater. I mean, I like recently being like, you know, the last like 30, 40, 35 years. Yeah. I mean, you know, guy is getting up there in age. But yeah, I mean, like I think a lot of his pieces didn't actually find that critical acclaim until they were already premiered, you know, and they already sort of had a life.
Yeah. Wasn't it that year that Sondheim was nominated for a Tony for Best Musical against La Cage aux Folles? And when La Cage aux Folles won, the composer went up there and said something like, "This is a win for melody." Oh. Which is like an interesting way, like that's a way where you can have your critique like codified in history, because he critiqued another show like in a big way at the Tonys. Yeah. And I think there's something so powerful about that. And that's someone who's not a critic. Yeah. Like that is something that a lot of people remembered as now, and then that's how they thought of Sondheim's work for a little bit after that it was anti-melody or
fascinating. That was also the year that Sondheim won the Pulitzer Prize for Sunday in the Park with George.
So fascinating.
Fascinating, yeah.
Francis, I think we need to do an episode on award shows and like thinking about awards and criticism.
That's where I think I'd be more useful. That's more where my, I think, understanding is a little bit more clearer.
We're going to have Shola Reacts Part 2. Yeah. Award shows.
That's like your marketing as an actor, your trajectory as an actor, what you think of, like awards are inherently tied to the film industry and the theater industry and all industries really, but they're very public with performances as an actor. So
do you have any previews of favorite award show performances that we need to be aware of?
Oh, from the Tonys?
Yeah, from the Tonys.
Oh, for the I think you meant like speeches, like
or speeches.
Award show speeches are often used to criticize something about the society, about the way arts is made, about the industry. They're almost always used in that way. So even like Lupita Nyong'o saying, no matter where you're from, your dreams are valid. It's a criticism of who's accepted into the industry. Yeah. So it's kind of, I think there's so much there that's about marketing. It's about changing things. Sometimes it's about uplifting certain art. The award ceremonies are a serious vehicle for a lot of things. Yeah. So I think that there is something there. And it is directly tied to criticism. But I think one of my favorite performances, which I know Emily will hate, is the Ragtime. I love Ragtime. I love that Ragtime performance. I think that Audra McDonald up there, this powerhouse running to the end of the stage at the end of the intro to Ragtime.
There are also approximately 8,000 people on stage in that
performance. They are. They actually are. I think another one I liked was, what else did I like? I mean, there's They did. I like the Matilda kids
I love the
in
Matilda
2013,
kids.
right?
Yes.
They were so cute. Like, and they're also like very professional and very good dancers and good singers, and it was surprising to see them. I think that's the same performance. The 2013 Tonys, I remember those being very good, but I haven't watched the Tonys in a long time, so those are kind of like the last ones I've seen, honestly.
And now we're gonna have some weird like virtual Tony.
Which I probably won't watch either.
Ooh.
But
Wow.
Everyone, all my friends will be there.
Okay. Well, thank you for all of that. I loved it.
It's all getting cut.
Use approximate.
No.
You can cut it.
No. I think it was great, and the reason why is because there are tangents of all of that and your impressions of critics that are going to come in and filter in through like the stuff that I have found and I'm going to present to you. So we're going to start with statistics and demographics. So this is all from a survey called the Classical Music Critic, a survey of music critics at general interest and specialized news publications in America. Great name. It was done by the Music Critics Association of North America and National Arts Journalism program at Columbia University, and it was published in 2005. So it was taken in 2004 and then like published in 2005. And so this survey surveyed 181 working critics. And although the survey is already dated by over 15 years, it does give us a picture of what the scene was like 15 years ago. And I think, I would imagine that actually a lot of them are still working right now too. So that kind of gives us a little bit of a snapshot. As we might expect, the average classical music critic is a white 52-year-old male with a graduate degree.
And nobody is surprised.
Yeah. Crickets. Absolute crickets.
Only 1 in 4 critics is female, and only 8% are non-white. 2/3 of classical music critics, 68%, are white males. 24% are white females. All of the self-identified non-white critics in this survey were under the age of 55. Half of the youngest critics in the survey, 35 and under, are women. So that I found pretty interesting, right? Because that means the field is gradually and changing. And this is back in 2004. Okay, 2 more things before I open it up to discussion. 64% of the people surveyed have graduate degrees. 96% have received some formal training in music, music history, or music criticism, and 42% hold a music-related degree.
Fascinating. Can we unpack some of those statistics a little bit?
Oh, yeah. I want to pause for some discussion here, too.
Yeah, what are your thoughts?
Can you say those last numbers one more time?
Sure.
Of what?
So 42% of the 181 working critics surveyed hold a music-related degree.
That doesn't surprise me. Allison, can you clear something up for us? Or for me? Is there such a thing as a degree in music criticism?
So that actually interested me too, because I don't know. Maybe there are out there. I'm sure that maybe journalism schools have specialized tracks. I think that's possible. I know about the Rubin Institute for Music Criticism. That's like a once a year program. But I don't think that's a degree awarding program.
That's really
and music criticism, a degree in music criticism, maybe that's a graduate degree. I would be hard pressed to find an undergraduate degree that's a degree in music criticism. I know a lot more of like BAs in music, right? So general music education, or a BM in music history, something like that. I could see like musicology fitting really well in here, but I don't really know of any. I can't name any off the top of my head that are music criticism degrees.
Yeah. I wonder if music criticism is a little bit like teaching. Like people, really good teachers really prioritize like the teaching part of teaching, but sometimes universities make this mistake of saying that because someone is great in their field, automatically they're going to be a good teacher, which is like so not the case. Holy God.
Yeah.
And maybe music criticism is somewhat similar. Like people are like, oh, because they have, a degree in music, musicology, they will be good at music criticism. I'm not saying these critics are bad, but like it does seem that having some sort of like structural program might be an interesting thing to learn how to do this.
Yeah. I mean, all these critics are critics of classical music.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well,
so,
critics of, I guess the title of the survey is classical music, but I would imagine that also these critics could be working in other genres of music in addition to classical music.
okay.
Yeah, like what even is classical music?
Yeah. I wonder
know?
how they're. I guess I would like, just from like an academic perspective, to know what the definition is of classical music and what are like what are the parameters of the test, just to know who is critiquing, who are these critics that we're looking at? What is the pool? Are they all critics of, are we talking about critics when they're critiquing classical music? Are they the same? Are we looking at just critics of a lot of different things, just critics in general? Because I wonder if we include like critics of theater from 2004 or critics of like, or critics of pop music. Like if like there's any crossover with these same critics, because that'd be so interesting to know that like there's like, what if there's like a 20% of the classical music critics are also critics of musical theater in 2004. Like that'd be really interesting to look at.
I want to jump in here and say that I think that the field is changing because of the way journalism is changing, right? So I want to throw in also in this pool of data that we have here, most of the critics surveyed in this 181 pool are freelancers. So I would imagine that means that a lot of them are writing stories for all sorts of music, and also in the ways that like music sections, arts sections of newspapers have dramatically changed over the last 15 years. They're shrinking.
Yeah.
Right?
That's an interesting statistic about the free. I mean, like, can you imagine a critic 100? I can't imagine that there are 181 critics in America actually making a living wage writing classical music criticism. What?
Well, I think one of the most staggering, well, I don't know if staggering is the word I use for the data right now, but like I think one of the most like interesting pieces of data was that the only credential given for any of these critics was that was the graduate degree. So many of them. What was the number?
I'm looking. 64% have graduate degrees,
64%
and only 42% hold a music-related degree.
So
that's less than half.
Yeah, for classical music. So it's like these are people who like classical music, but who didn't necessarily study classical music.
Who'd be like me,
which is interesting. Yeah,
being like, I really love basketball. I'm gonna go out and be with my like conservatory training. I'm gonna go out and be a basketball.
Which I wonder,
sportscaster.
Yeah, and that's actually the case for like many, like I wouldn't say maybe for sportscasters, but like for a lot of people who write opinions. So many film critics have nothing to do with film.
Really?
Yeah, they're like people who like film, who are critiquing it based off of like what their knowledge of what they like in films and like their knowledge of film. But they're not, many of them are not actors and they're critiquing acting. They're not directors, they're critiquing directing. They're not, which makes me think that like, and some of those critiques are amazing, right? So it's not necessarily that you need to be those things, but I wonder, what is there a difference between just opinion and critique? And if there is, what is necessary for your opinion to become a critique? Or I feel like when I think of critique, I'm thinking of opinion, like opinion that's respected when I think of critique. And I think of an opinion, like when I see the New York Post an opinion about Meryl Streep, that's how I read it, as just an opinion. Like I don't give it a credence of like, I wouldn't say this is a critique. I would say maybe they're critiquing her, right? Maybe this is like critical of Meryl Streep. But I don't know. There's, I guess the word critique, maybe just personally for me, it's like there has to be a level of respect that I'm supposed to have for your opinion.
For your understanding of
the
field, whatever. I mean, I think about my my dad is a musical theater like he knows everything there is to know about musical theater. He has read every book about American musical theater. He loves it. If he wanted to go in and do an analysis of musical theater, he would be a good person to do that, but like he doesn't have any formal training in it. So would you call that an opinion piece? Or like, I'm guessing, where does the like degree come in, and like, is that important?
I don't know if a degree is important as much as experience and understanding. And like, when I say peer reviewed, like I think in my head, I will accept, I think it's about acceptance as an audience member of critique or of somebody who's reading someone's opinion, accepting it as a critique, you know? And I think for me, when I see somebody's, like if I see an opinion piece that's by somebody who spent 60 years in that industry, who knows these people, who knows how this art form works, who's created great art in that style, who is well versed, who has written before, like, then I'm like, okay, like this seems to be, they're almost themselves as people have been peer reviewed to be able to critique this.
Yeah,
thing.
yeah.
Like there is like pressure. They've had some sort of experience. Whereas if this person is just someone who loves film, which is amazing and knows a lot about film, maybe I have to find my way into like legitimize it. Why is your opinion important to me? You know,
this is really important for you to trust this review that you're reading. You need to know that this person is authoritative. And I think for me, that raises the question of, what are these critics' backgrounds? Like, how did they get to where they are? What sorts of like skill sets and knowledge pools do they have in their background that allows them to write about music or about the arts in this way? And then here's something else that's interesting, I think, in particular for our project. Most classical music critics feel that they have a lot of autonomy in determining what stories to pursue. 2/3 of the 181 surveyed said that most of the stories they filed in the past 12 months were their own ideas.
So there's not an editor hanging over their head saying like, you need to go to this like, off-Broadway show on this night. Like the freelancer is like setting their agenda and saying like, I'm gonna go. I heard this is amazing through my colleagues, and I'm gonna go and review it. But
more than 3/4 of critics agree that music critics, often at the behest of their editors, tend to concentrate on high-profile performers, composers, and institutions at the expense of other deserving musicians and issues.
Well, that's not surprising.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Yeah. I love how that feels like it illuminates like a beef in the field. It's like, there's so many good composers. Like, why are we not focusing on them? Like, why do we always have to like go and review like, I don't know, I just about said Nathan Lane. Like, I think I'm still in Tony Lane.
I was like, oh, who can we? I've been so careful too about dropping certain names too, because I'm like, wait, who are we gonna piss off?
But like Philip Glass. Yeah. Philip Glass is above us.
Yeah, he's not gonna Hey Philip, we love your music.
We love it.
You're so inspirational. But yeah, I mean, they do review you a lot. Yeah, I mean, I think that there is something to that. Like, it does. I think a lot of this data just marks what I think has been very clear to artists for a very long time about what's, I don't want to say popular, but what the trends are in terms of who gets center stage, who gets the spotlight, who gets to be, like we said, part of history, and who gets to fade into obscurity.
Well, I think these demographics point to something really important, which is like, if the like sort of typical music reviewer is a like 54-year-old white man with a graduate degree, I mean, obviously like that already starts to paint a picture of like what their ears are trained to listen to.
Yeah.
And that makes me a little wary about, their ability to actually step out of that way that you're sort of like forced to listen to things in the conservatory. You know what I mean?
I mean, I'm of two like minds to this. Like, there's a part of me that's like, oh, I have to understand why your opinion is legitimate, why your opinion is valid, why I should listen to it if I'm going to accept it as a legitimate critique of whatever.
Right.
And on one hand, that can mean having an education in it, but there's something also elitist about having, like we just said, an education in requiring a graduate level education to be able to critique something like music, when I think where I'm more concerned is like experience and engagement in terms of like having been a part of an art form, that sort of critique of it. Like, I mean, the critiques from people who have been part of things are just feel to me more legit, regardless of their education, because I'm realizing now that for the reason we just said, seeing a bunch of graduate school students who are now like 54 years old, you know, who are critiquing classical music, that to me, it doesn't actually, there's something about just the demographic of who gets to make music, the exclusivity of classical music, the exclusion of people of color, of all types of marginalized groups, that makes me sort of roll my eyes at anybody with that background critiquing music and think that like, well, I mean, your critique is based off of, if you're 54 and you went to grad school how many years ago, like, you know, your critique is probably based off of a lot of honestly racist and exclusivist standards of music that maybe are very nuanced, but you can have nuanced critiques of music that are different, you know what I mean? And so anyway, so I'm of like two minds of it. I sort of don't really know what to think in that sense.
Well, and to affirm your statement, if the self-identified people of color are all younger, you know, like what does that do for us who do sort of have this inclination to look for experience as a marker of trust? You know, because I'm thinking that like, yeah, you end up trusting like the white guy that's been around for a long time. And do like we as audience members afford the same courtesy to people that are younger?
Yeah.
That's really interesting. Yeah.
My biggest bias a lot of times I've found is age. Like I really sort of lean towards experience.
Oh, interesting. Yeah. I think that there's something there too. I mean, what you just said is interesting because it's sort of like what came first. I wonder like I would have to do my own research to know who were the big critics. Like who were the people who were like creating the first sort of publications, and were they, when I'm guessing they were young when they started, or maybe they weren't. But I wonder like what set the tone for us thinking the way we think.
Well, I mean, historically, there were a lot of critics who were also composers themselves. And this is not just in music, but this is also in like literature. I'm thinking about like poetry. A lot of the big name poets, you know, T.S. Eliot was a very prolific writer to talk about writing. Like he would actually write essays and essays about, you know, the field that he's in and critiquing other people, and then like almost literally bolstering his own work and his own viewpoints. And that kind of change, that makes a big difference if we're talking about like what lasts in history.
Well, and I was just thinking about the Alex Ross new Wagner book. I haven't read it yet, but I think that when you're a critic and you do have this you do have all of this experience, like it's almost like you're slicing the pie of like what gets said and what gets imprinted in history becomes bigger and bigger and bigger.
Yeah.
And it just worries me that all of these are like 50-year-old white male conservatory students.
Yeah. And I wonder, like, when we think experience, like, I mean, you just said that the first critics were people who did the art form that they're critiquing. And so it's like, there's something to that, right? I mean, that can be, you being well-versed can have something to do with your age, right? But it can also just have something to do with your talent and exposure. Obviously in the US, that's directly related to like class and skin color and all these different things. But, you know, there are, you know, people who have been creating music for a long time, who've been engaged for a long time, and they're only in their 30s. Like, I think of the people who are a part of MOC who have experience, who have done all these things. I mean, there's nobody over, well, you know, they lean younger.
Yeah.
You know.
This leads really well into my last statistic for this section, which is critics strongly believe that they have a duty to educate the public about classical music and why it matters. 90% of those who answered the survey feel this way, and nearly 2/3 strongly agreed with this description of their mission as critics.
Okay. We're going to wrap up here for the time being and give you a chance to think about that last statistic. Here it is again. Critics strongly believe they have a duty to educate the public about classical music and why it matters. 90% of those who answered the survey feel this way, and nearly 2/3 of the critics surveyed strongly agree with the description of their mission as critics. Next week, we are going to refocus on how the critics see the purpose of their role in the field. Join us next week as Allison, Shola, and I continue to wander our way through the expansive world of music criticism. Thank you for listening to another episode of Miss Opera Music Mister. If you like what you've heard, please feel free to follow and engage with us on social media. We are on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, and would love to talk to you about your thoughts about the contemporary opera scene. Be sure to check out all the other incredible projects being incubated with Midnight Oil Collective at this time. And as always, tune in next week to hear about more discussions about the contemporary opera world featuring our favorite opera scholars and composers. You know, the people who are actually doing the thing. Lots of love, y'all.
This podcast episode was produced by Connor O'Toole.